our guest is Fazal Muhammad, co-founder and CEO of FaceShift Technologies. Welcome, Fazal.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to chat with you today, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. We've been chatting for many times, right? So finally got a chance to do this. So
Absolutely.
tell us about yourself and also your company. How did you start? What was the pain? What is the pain point? How are you solving it, please?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, hi, everyone. My name is Fazal, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of FaceShift Technologies. I'm based out of Toronto, and the company we started in 2019 with the idea of accelerating the development of new materials. There's a lot of reasons why we need new materials today, to meet new regulatory standards, to improve the performance of an existing technology, or to develop more sustainable materials that make new and innovative technologies possible. But the problem with materials development is that it's a very long process. It takes about 10 years or so to design a new material and bring it to the market. So that's what FaceShift is doing. We're accelerating the development of new materials, but also commercializing those materials and bringing them to the market, to the consumers, by partnering with manufacturers that already exist in the industry today. So that's what we're trying to do, and bring the customer's pain point that we're trying to solve is that a lot of these customers need new materials, but they can't quite develop those materials because they don't have the resources or the time to do so. So for them, we identify those needs, develop those materials, and bring those materials to them, fully validated, fully tested in the lab.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So, just the kind of going back to the pain point you're talking about, it takes a long time, 10 years. In fact, I've heard of anywhere between 10 to 40 years. Some extreme, examples where I think I forgot the name of the material, but it took like 42 years. So it's certainly very long. And so tell us a little bit more about your solution, right? So I know you're using AI and simulation, and how are you doing it? And then what kind of specific materials you're focusing on, and why do you think your solution is differentiating?
Absolutely. So I think before we get into the solution, it's important to understand why it takes so long to develop and commercialize those materials. So I would say the development itself takes really long because we do it through trial and error and physical experiments. So you can think of it this way, that designing a new material is like finding a needle in the haystack, only the haystack is much larger than our proverbial haystack. And the way we identify those materials is by looking at each individual hay in the haystack to see whether if it's a needle or not. And the way we do it is through physical experiments that can take sometimes from weeks to months to produce individual results. So we have to do a lot of these experiments over the span of, let's say, 10 to 20 years to really identify a material that is our needle, the material that satisfies all our requirements. Now, that's just half the story. The other half of the story is the commercialization itself. Oftentimes, what we have seen in the industry is that there's a disconnect between the materials that are being designed by the scientist in a lab and what the engineers that are designing the product need. So because of which, materials are often designed to have revolutionary properties, but they're not designed to meet all of the requirements that the customers might have. So the way we are doing things differently is that, one, we start with a specific use case. We talk to companies, we talk to engineers within those companies to identify what are the challenges they're currently facing. We look deep into the product and also look at the processes used to make those products. Then, with those in mind, with the process in mind and the product in mind, we design a material specifically to satisfy the needs of that specific use case. So we are inverse designing from a use case to the material. Now, in terms of actually bringing it to the market as well, because we design the materials to be compatible with existing manufacturing processes, we can actually scale it up from lab scale to commercial scale a lot faster, because we don't need to make significant innovations or changes on the production side. So our alloys are more like a drop-in solution into the existing supply chain, into the existing value chain. And because of which they're able to reach the customers a lot faster. And that's what we're trying to do. Development, now we accelerate the development by using computational tools like AI and simulations. So it's the analogy that I use is it's like a virtual lab, where the AI serves the role of a researcher and the simulations serve as a lab. And the AI models essentially look at that large design space, the large haystack, and explore them, predict the properties of new new material formulations. And for example, with alloys, it's the compositions. And then evaluate them through simulations. So kind of like conducting virtual experiments to evaluate whether if a material has the performance or not. So it significantly accelerates our time to the market by allowing us to do a lot less experiments finally, and increasing the chances of success eventually when we do experiments.
Absolutely. So as a materials person myself, right? So this idea of inverse design, it seems to be obvious, but then it's not really happening yet. It's kind of just at the
Yes.
beginning, and then which is considered. I've heard of people saying that's the holy grail of the material space, right? So I'm so
Mhm.
glad you're doing it. So now let's actually kind of go into the personal side of the journey, right? So you started a company. How did you start a company, right? So like, there's always this thinking like, am I the right person to do it? Is this the good timing or this huge amount of risk there? How did you start?
Absolutely. I would say it's one of those things where you just, if you have that initial conviction, you just have to jump into it, because there's always going to be some unknown risks that the founder might not see at the early stages. And when they start to actually build the company, they will come to understand that there's a lot more to be done than they initially thought. So it's one of those things that you just need to get started. Obviously, there's certain personal considerations you have to take into account before doing that. For me, I was very inspired by the use of AI in the drug discovery space. That is one of the biggest success stories of AI in enhancing someone's life. So we see that to be the case in the materials industry too. That we have seen increasing use of AI and other computational tools to accelerate the development of new materials, and just not new materials, but materials that would be more sustainable, materials that would improve our quality of lives, and so on and so forth. But I would say the materials industry was about 10 years behind the curve than the drug discovery industries for a variety of technical reasons. So the story was itself full of conviction for me. The next thing that I needed to find was my co-founders, which I did as well. Highly technical people with deep domain expertise in computational material science. And all three of us resonated quite a bit on the idea of accelerating the discovery of new and better materials. So we started this company knowing that there's going to be risks that will come to surface later down the line. But the main thing at that point is to know what you don't know, and we always be willing to learn from the people who do know, and actively seek that advice to make sure that you don't make a lot of mistakes. You're going to make enough mistakes, but just it's a balance between making too many mistakes versus making too little mistakes, and you have to find that balance by talking to people.
Okay, so did you start this idea like, in your head before you reach out to co-founders, or was it kind of more like a group discussion, brainstorming session, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I had a very general idea of the use of AI in materials discovery. Obviously, my background is in computational physics, so I did not have a deep background in material science. So one of the ways I was sort of trying to fill that knowledge gap was trying to speak with professors at the University of Toronto who have this domain expertise in materials engineering and especially computational material science. So while I had that initial idea that we can use AI to accelerate materials discovery, I still needed that deeper expertise, which came from these professors. So through those initial consultations, informal consultations with the professors, I sort of initially conceptualized an idea. And then at that point, one of those professors introduced me to my current co-founders, who at the time were doing their PhDs under that professor. Both of them had exactly the skill set that was needed at that time. One of my co-founders, our CTO, Gurjot, he has a very deep expertise in applying machine learning to material science challenges, while other co-founder, Abu, our chief science officer, he has a lot of expertise in using computational tools like simulations to study new materials and use that information to design better materials. So started with an initial concept, but really the final idea, the final process was really developed in consultation with all three of us, all three co-founders that we have today.
Okay. Okay, now you started a company, right? So I remember, when you just started a company, we started talking, right? That was really interesting
Yes.
experience as well. So you started a company, right? So is that kind of as rosy as you were thinking about? And there's, I think it was Elon Musk who actually said it, kind of starting a company is like eating glass and steering into the bits. Is it kind of like that, or is it even more sort of challenging or less so?
Yeah, absolutely. So, going back to what I said earlier, there's obviously a lot of unknown risks that a founder will not know. 100% there's going to be things like that. So it's not going to be rosy, but there are parts of starting a company that are rosy. Um, there's a lot of things that I enjoy doing as a founder in a startup. I enjoy speaking to really smart people who know what they're doing, speaking to investors. I know a lot of founders don't like the fundraising process, but I enjoy the fundraising process because I get to get a lot of insights from investors. And just attending conferences and meeting people in the ecosystem, that's one thing that I really enjoy, and that's the part that's rosy. But then there's obviously other parts that I do not enjoy as much, and that's always going to be things that I would need to do that I don't enjoy doing. So there's definitely
Give us an example, right? So what are the things that are not as rosy, and how are you doing it?
Absolutely. So I think going out and doing customer discovery is something that it's a difficult process. It's an interesting process because it's you have to talk to a lot of customers first to really identify who is going to be your customer. To build that initial understanding of who that initial customer, that ideal customer looks like for a company like ours. And a lot of those times, those conversations will not pan out as you might have hoped. They might take longer. The companies might not be receptive to your solution. It's a really iterative process where you're talking to customers, you're modifying your pitch, you're also taking their feedback into account when designing your business model and things and so on and so forth. So it takes a lot of back and forth. It takes a lot of no's and yeses to get to that point where you have that greater understanding of the customer. So that process of getting to that is not quite as rosy for me. The other thing would be there's just the mundane activities that a CEO needs to do in a startup. The financials and the other things that are not quite as exciting. And those are things that can eventually be outsourced or delegated to someone else in the team. But initially, it's the CEO that's doing all of the other things that need to be done, the assorted items. And those are the things that I would say are not quite as rosy. And then there's always the tough decisions of pivoting from something to something else, and also just acknowledging the fact that maybe we made in past some wrong decisions, and we need to learn from those wrong decisions and use that to our advantage. Those are the things that are sometimes hard to accept, but eventually the founders become adept to accepting those things and accepting the non-rosy parts of the startup.
Yeah, that's great. Let's try to unpack some of the the customer development part you mentioned there, right? I was going to ask you about a question, early stage company, right? How are you trying to find the product market fit, which like you kind of touched upon that already, right? So, and also you mentioned about pivoting, right? How do you prioritize your time here? And also you mentioned about, hey, talking to potential customers may not be something that you want to do, right? So how are you, progressing here, right? How do you find either the market fit, and then if it's not a fit, how do you pivot?
Absolutely.
So, stuff like that. Tell us more about your strategy.
Yeah, so product market fit is an interesting one for us because it's something that we have to do multiple times. Our business model basically hinges on the fact that we need to design multiple materials and we need to bring multiple materials to the market. So we are really building a portfolio of materials and commercializing more than one materials at a time. So in a way, we're not trying to find a general product market fit for the startup. Obviously we are, but we have to make that process of finding product market fit for individual materials repeatable. So the way it works for us is that to identify what product we are going to build, we first have to talk to the customers to see what is it that they need. So whenever we actually design a material, before we design anything, we talk for about a month with potential customers and potential manufacturers to identify where the pain points with the material or an industry lie. And then we design any material only when we have full confidence in that, the fact that we know what the customer needs. So it's very important to start with the customer conversations and then design a product. And then oftentimes the product you might get at the end of the process, which for us is the material itself, might check most of the boxes, but one or two boxes are still left unchecked, which means that there might be another one or two iterations needed to further fine tune the material for the customer requirements. So that's how we actually get to the product market fit. And that's what the product market fit looks like for us, a material that actually satisfies a customer's needs fully and checks all the boxes. And that's something that we need to do time over time with our portfolio of materials that we're building. So that's what it looks like for us. Oftentimes, there has been a point where we have sort of changed our business model or pivoted away from what we were previously doing. When we have a platform like ours, our Allo design platform, the computational design platform, it is something that can be monetized in various different ways. It can be provided as a software. We can provide services to the companies, or we can use that platform internally to design our own materials. Each of those strategies have different pros and cons. Software is a lot easier to implement. It's a lot faster sales cycles, which is what the traditional VC market is familiar with. But a materials company, it's a longer term play. It creates more value down the line than a software company, but it's something that takes a lot more time as well. So when we were thinking about this initially, these were the things that we were sort of comparing against, and we started by providing services, providing a platform to the companies, but then we quickly realized that, hey, if we have a platform, then we should use that platform to develop something that we can ourselves bring to the market. A material would create a lot more value in the market than a platform to create those materials. So why don't we actually create our own materials and bring them to the market? And we have seen this story in the biotech industry, in the drug discovery industry, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, right? So kind of just echoing back to what you said, they always start with customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mark 49 with our venture building business, right? It's all actually about talking to potential customers to get the pain points before you do anything else, right?
Yes.
So kind of, we don't have much time left here. Let's actually talk about the fundraising side of things, right? You've been talking, are you raising money now? And then I guess tell us about you mentioned about you've seen some patterns of talking to many different investors, both VCs and the CVCs. That's
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we are actually currently fundraising right now. As you know, we're raising about $3 million, and fortunately enough, we have already raised about 2 million of that 3, signed a term sheet and everything. So we are very much in the process and progressing in that process. And so obviously we have had conversations with a lot of VCs and CVCs during this process. And I think starting with CVCs, I would say there's obviously a difference between how CVCs operate and traditional VCs operate. And CVCs generally look at startups either as a completely financial investment or a completely strategic investment. And I think when they look at a startup as a completely financial investment, their way of evaluating a startup as an investment opportunity is a lot more traditional and conservative than VCs. Their process also reflects that. When they look at a startup as a strategic investment opportunity, they don't necessarily see whether if it's a viable financial investment or not. They see it as a tool that they're purchasing that they could potentially use for themselves. And oftentimes, a lot of these CVCs tend to also lead the rounds at very early stages, which very much scares away some of the other corporates that might want to work with the startup too, and limits the growth of that startup. So I think there might be a bit of a disconnect between the CVCs and what the startup needs at that stage. And I think there needs to be a better understanding there. But I think there's obviously a lot of value also in having a CVC work with you and have a large company back you in your space. That brings a lot of credibility as well, if that's done correctly. With VCs, I would say there's a lot of good VCs that are investing in deep tech and hard tech today. But I think a lot of VCs that claim to invest in deep tech and hard tech are not necessarily ready for the risk that comes with deep tech and hard tech. So I think there needs to be a bit more maturity that's needed in the deep tech investment sector, where VCs need to get a bit more comfortable with the tech and market risk that comes with deep tech. But regardless, there's a lot of great CVCs and VCs that we have talked with and we continue to work with over the last few years.
Absolutely. So any concluding remarks, any advice you would, gave any, aspiring entrepreneurs as well as entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. So I would say if you have an idea, if you know what you're doing, and I really stress that fact that you know what you're doing, because you have to understand that some ideas sound really nice, but they need to be validated by talking to experts and potential customers. So once you have done that and you have conviction in your idea, just take the step, do it, because there's always going to be unknown risks, and it might not be given in the initial stages that what is it that you need to face down the line and what is it that needs to be done. So it's really that initial conviction that keeps you driving forward. And obviously you need the people to support you during that process as well. So find the right co-founders, find the right investors and supporters to keep your journey going. And yeah, just enjoy the process. It's more about the process than the outcome.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much. Again, thanks for your time, Fazal.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.